Greetings, ladies and melogents, and welcome to the latest edition of RE355, where I take old stories I've narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called In Search of Purity, written by 3DucksInAManSuit. Where Supremacy George walked, disciples dropped to their knees. Where Supremacy George glanced, lesser breeds lowered their eyes in reverence. Where Supremacy George breathed, beings who could lay claim to only a grain of the great gene darted in to taste the air. As if by simply occupying a space he had recently departed, they could absorb some of his purity. A mere glance would tell the intelligent observer why. His skin was the perfect shade of pink. 2 eyes, 2 arms, 2 legs, a mop of brown hair. Indeed, the only sign that Supremacy George was anything but a tried and true 100% pure human would be the tiny bumps at the bridge of his forehead. 2 horns so tiny they had not even breached the skin. A slight sign of Dezaran heritage somewhere in his lineage. He stood among the top, the small elite who could claim that they were almost human. Almost. He needed to show no identification to enter the facility. The mongrels who guarded the doors took one look at his near-perfect face and opened the door without a word. Supremacy George covered his nose with a lace handkerchief as he passed them, hiding his grins of distaste. One of the mongrels had green skin, the other had a thin, inverted knees of someone with a strong streak of luxodite. His guards, semi-clean, who boasted of no more than 40% estimated purity, finally had their chance to stand tall, passing the watchmen who had even less of the great gene than them. They made sure their juniors showed the proper reverence on their faces. He was greeted by the facility overseer, awaiting his arrival with her senior staff in tow. She was a heightened 70 to 80% pure, only the fine scales running down her arms and her eyes, slitted and surrounded in a raccoon-like coloration, gave her tainted blood away. Further proof of the genetic superiority of the human race that only a hybrid could truly accomplish something like they had done here. She bowed her head in respect as Supremacy George approached to accept the greetings of the facility staff. Low, like the subordinate she was, but not as groveling as the lower purity mongrels behind her and around her. "Welcome, Supremacy. I am Heightened Olivia. You honor us with your presence." George allowed himself a benevolent smile.
"It seems my presence is well earned today, hybrid. News of your success has the cult in quite a stir."
He could see the same excitement reflected in the eyes of every man and woman in the room, a crowd of scientists having achieved their dream.
"Begin the demonstration at once,"
Supremacy George commanded, and the mongrels hurried to obey. George was led down 2 levels to the primary testing room. He stopped on the way, only to pay his respects to the symbol that adorned the rear of the vast chamber. The symbol of the holy cult of man was a simple outline of the perfect human body standing over the universe. It was the mark of those who followed the path, who sought to claim a glimpse of the glory of humanity by finding the lost genes wherever they cropped up and carefully breeding them. Such convergence had led to the creation of no more than 4 beings of the supremacy level, those who possessed the estimated genetic components that was more than 90% human. Hybrid Olivia provided more of the story as they walked, putting their achievement into context. "As we all know, humanity underwent first contact with alien life sometime in the late 21st century of their calendar, approximately 2,000 years ago," she spoke with the gifted voice of a lecturer on their most familiar topic. "Following the contact, humans and aliens integrated over generations, slowly poisoning, then diluting entirely the human genome. The last absolutely pure human being with no history of gene contamination whatsoever is believed to have died a little over 200 years ago, after which a third pan-galactic war muddled the records and caused confusion as to what human genes even looked like. It has been the sincere dream of the cult of man ever since to discover the lost gene, to find an intact human and observe that template, to know more clearly what it is we strive for. It has been an impossible dream." They reached their destination. The hybrid Olivia turned to Supremacy George with a fierce grin of victory. "Until now." The machine that dominated the room was so vast and naked in its design that it was impossible to truly tell where it ended and the wars began. The core of it appeared to be a circular dome rotating around a raised platform, the center point where the fourth-dimensional tear would be opened. Flowing lines of energy crisscrossed over the ceiling in a network of power supply that fed the myriad of inexplicable components scattered throughout. Consoles lined the edge of the room, every one of them staffed by engineers in white coats, the traditional standard uniform for humans who devoted themselves to knowledge. Small-tail's guests have been successful. All that's left is to look for the right place. We have already plugged in a few set of coordinates in pre-contact Earth. Supremacy George nodded, excitement making him temporarily forget that he was in a room with yet more mongrels.
Begin at once.
Most of the jargon being tossed around the room was completely unknown to Supremacy George. Not his job, not his task. While hybrid Olivia took her point on the main console and barked orders to the lesser creatures under her, he stood with his hands clasped behind his back, looking imperious. The room would not soon forget the presence of such an honorable being among them. The lighting shifted to blue, the machine whirred into life. The flowing energy of the power lines intensified as the dome began to rotate slowly over the platform. Then, at the center point where the dome was focused, a phenomenon in the air manifested. Crackling energy sparked above the platform, growing into a fissure in nothingness. Then slowly, over almost 30 seconds of careful expansion, while the machine whirred and stabilized, the fissure grew into a window of blackness. Temporal windows table input the first set of coordinates. Mark 1, Melbourne, Australia, circa 2022. Calm and in control, highborn Olivia directed a team even as her own hands carefully manipulated the keystone controls in front of her. Before the eyes of everyone present, the window became an image. A clear blue sky dotted with faint streaks of fluffy clouds stretched over the wide horizon. Supremacy George recognized the image immediately from the rare surviving pictures of old Earth in the cult database. They had done it. They were looking at the most sacred of places, Earth before the corruption. The room held its breath. Every eye turned to George, beholding his faint smile.
Well done, everyone.
His simple words of praise burst the banks and bubbling celebration erupted amongst the various scientists. Several mongrels shook each other's hands in the traditional method of greeting and celebration gleefully. They bowed to hybrid Olivia and Supremacy George, a less tactile method from old Earth as, obviously, they were not permitted to touch beings of higher purity than themselves. George didn't take his eyes off the scene the entire time. Old Earth. Just looking at it, he could feel his breath quicken and his blood boil with excitement. They would make history this day. Okay, calm down. I want that perspective adjusted. Get me a view of the Earth below. Hybrid Olivia smoothly took control of the situation back and dispatched new instructions to her subordinates. After much fussing and manipulating fine controls, the view through the time portal shifted downwards, changing from a view of the sky to one of an ocean. Clear blue waters that seemed still from this altitude. Supremacy George nodded with all the serenity of an angel. Yes, from the old maps he had read, Melbourne was supposed to be coastal. The perspective shifted again, laterally this time, and land came into view. For the first time, the cultists lay eyes upon a real city of man. Not some historic recreation from the great archives, not a hazy surviving image reconstructed from old Earth. An actual city. It was sprawling. Tall buildings reached for the sky at the core of the habitation, stretching out to every bit of land in the area. Boats crowded the water. The time window had given them a view of some time around mid-afternoon. The sun was low on the horizon, lengthening shadows, yet activity still buzzed within the sprawling city. As they zoomed in, closing up on one of the many streets, the cultists got their first view of actual humans. Humans! Real men and women of the human race before first contact. A whole world of people with a guaranteed 100% pure genes. Supremacy George felt his eyes sting. Was he going to cry? Excellent. Only humans could cry. It was a trait not shared by any other sentient race. Only those of a very high purity could perform the action. It was one of the ultimate status symbols.
There, the one on the balcony. Bring us closer to her. Let's have a look.
The image sharpened and approached the particular building. The extension to the structure contained a small platform adorned with chairs and a table. An open door revealed a modest but comfortable living area. On the balcony lounged an adult human female. She was adorned in night clothing, leaning back on a long chair halfway in the sun. She was reading from a rectangular slab George recognized as an old Earth book, though the aesthetically rendered glyphs on the cover remained indecipherable as a long-lost language of ancient humanity. On the table beside her was an amber liquid contained in a bizarre curved cup balanced on a long stem. As they watched, she picked up the glass by the stem without looking and sipped at the liquid before resting it back in its position on the table. The entire team, both high and low-born, devoured the scene with ravenous eyes, hungry for every detail. This person before them was undoubtedly a human. No mixed genes, no percentages. She was a being higher even than Supremacy George, an absolutely pure human. George swiftly took mental notes. Darker skin than he had, less pink and more light brown. Yes, this pigment would be recorded and held as the ideal to be sought after now. Her hair was a brown color, almost black. Her eyes could not be seen behind the protective covering. They would have to observe someone else to find the ideal eye shape and color. We need to view another, hybrid Olivia stammered out, interrupting the clicking of notes being entered into the database. We need a counterpoint, a confirmation. Her statement was addressed to Supremacy George. He nodded magnanimously, allowing the transition. Her logic was sound. They didn't have to look far. Further within the habitation was a human male engaged with form of visual entertainment. The device he was manipulating in his hands made it clear that he was interacting with the media, not a passive observer. Some kind of mind exercise? Excellent. They could observe a male and a female, a perfect opportunity. His hair was a dark color like the woman outside. Her son? His eyes were brown. His skin was a lighter shade than the woman's. Did this mean that human males had darker skin? Supremacy George made a mental note. The window provided no audio, so it came as a complete surprise when the newcomer arrived. An adult male this time. He resembled the smaller one engaging with the visual media in skin tone and body shape. Supremacy George immediately assumed this to be a biological father. But the older male had sandy yellow hair tied in a small bundle at the back of his head. Perhaps it was colored artificially for aesthetic reasons, or was it the human and child had colored their hair? Which color was the human standard, the ideal?
Shift perspective, let's look for a different part of Earth.
Supremacy George made the call. The mongrels hurried to obey the supremacy, while he hybrid Olivia followed his orders up with more specific commands to her team. Coordinates Mark II, New York City. United States of America, same date. The window briefly went back to its neutral black before shifting to a new scene. This time, there was no picture of sea or sky. The image appeared much closer to the city itself. The room was treated immediately to an extremely dense human habitation area, crowded with buildings that stretched far into the sky. There was no shortage of choice for human beings to observe this time. They walked the streets in their thousands, stretching forward in the grid-patterned streets as far as the eye could see. This time, hybrid Olivia took personal control of the window view, zooming into the street level where the eclectic collection of people rushed by in their daily lives. For a moment, the room held its breath. Supremacy George looked on with an unreadable expression, bewilderment that he refused to let show striking at his heart.
Hybrid?
Yes, Supremacy.
You are certain this image is from the pre-contact humanity?
Yes, Supremacy. All the humans in the picture had the basic traits they all knew of. 2 arms, legs, eyes, and ears. A single nose. Most humans had a pale white skin and hair on their heads and a slight variations of black or brown shades, but far from all. Humans with black or brown skin tones walked among the rest. They behaved as the rest did. Neither showed any sign of overt superiority over the other. They did not cover their noses, nor look down in disgust. Were they the elite few, or the downtrodden minority? There was no immediate sign to tell, and that was far from all. Like in Melbourne, the humans had many different colors of hair. Some were now familiar sandy yellow, others darker. Some even had more exotic shades of blue or green. Supremacy George could not tell who had their hair artificially dyed. Perhaps they all were. Maybe deciding the color of your hair was considered a cultural staple. But then, there was the other differences. The humans ranged in height greatly. The tallest stood head and shoulders over the shortest. The males appeared generally taller than the females, but there was overlap. Some of the humans were slender, others fat. Some walked fast, others walked slow. Confusion spread with a murmur of uncertainty amongst the mongrel scientists, with the hybrid in supremacy looking on stoically. This was not the moment of revelation that they'd all been expecting. What was true humanity? Which of these many appearances was that of a pure human? Location. Everyone turned to stare at the unprompted hybrid Olivia. Mark 3, Tokyo, Nihon. A couple of mongrels looked back at Supremacy George, as if expecting him to counter the instruction. When he said nothing, they yet again changed the scene. As with the last two times, the most immediately noticeable thing was the environment. Like in New York, the buildings were tall, lit up at street level with neon splashes of vibrant colors and ancient human characters. They were seeing Tokyo at night, making the constellation of artificial light stand out all the more. The people had all black hair in this city. Supremacy George noted that with some relief. Perhaps this was a place where the culture of coloring hair was not as prevalent. There was the occasional person sporting streaks of color or a more extreme hairstyle, but simple black was the overwhelming majority here. Then the image zoomed in further, and Supremacy George found himself frowning again. They were still unmistakably human, but their facial features were notably different. Then a more familiar human like they had seen in previous cities walked past the window, blonde hair and round eyes. The surrounding majority of humans barely spared her a glance. Was she the superior or the inferior? Next scene. 2 hours later, they had to admit defeat. The time machine worked, the places they saw were real, but the views they had seen had left them shaken. There was no perfect human. They were all so different. Locations near the Earth's equator had shown them people with darker skin existing in the majority. Those in Europe or the GSA were mostly pale. But in all locations, no matter how prevalent one particular type of human that seemed to exist, there were always others of different types to be found. What color the original humans were, what texture exactly their skin held, how tall they were, how heavy, these were all topics of debate that Supremacy George had devoted hours of his life to. There was no doubting the evidence before their own eyes. Humans had not possessed one perfect form. There were many different peoples, even within close communities, let alone between continents. What were they going to do now? How was he to report this to the Supreme Council? Tell them that none of them had it right? The question tormented him all the way back to the capital. All the while, he remained silently contemplative. How do you break into a room full of hardcore human supremacists that a single perfect human wasn't what it meant to be human at all? End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Caspar Arnholt, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.